rencontre avec Terisa Siagatonu, le Pacifique au cœur des mots, avec à la modération Marie-Valérie. Je vous laisse la parole.
Maruru iorana tatou patoa e maiva e maruru tatou whanera I te ia vatea I te ie whanhor a whaiteiter apute Salon du Livre, Lire en Polynésie. E whanimei tatou te ie o Terisa Siagatonu e vahine pape ona no te whenua Samoa. Bonjour à tous, merci de nous rejoindre pour cette rencontre du 24e Salon du Livre à Papeete. Nous avons le plaisir d'accueillir Terisa Siagatonu, une autrice de Samoa qui vit également aux États-Unis. Elle est arrivée ce matin, fraîchement débarquée de l'avion. Bienvenue Terisa. Merci d'être avec nous et de nous accompagner pour ces quelques minutes d'échange. Est-ce que tu peux te présenter et présenter un peu ton travail d'écriture jusque-là?
Whawhitai tele lava, talofa lava, olo ingoa, Terisa Siagatonu. I do live in California, but my family is from the island of Tutuila, which is also a part of American Samoa. As folks know, Samoa is two separate islands, but my family comes from the villages of Asu and the village of Tula on the island of Tutuila. And I am a full-time touring poet, writer, artist, and community organizer. And so a lot of my work exists at the intersection of climate change, identity, indigenous rights, youth empowerment, and the power of storytelling and narrative. And so I'm very fortunate to be here for the residency, but also here for the 24th annual book fair here in Tahiti.
Merci beaucoup. On va continuer l'interview donc Terisa s'exprime en anglais. Si parmi vous des gens souhaitent une traduction, il y a des écouteurs qui sont disponibles. La traduction s'entend sur le canal 2. Sorry for the delay.
I'm sorry, I can't speak French.
No, we're used to it, but if you wish, you can apologize as well, but there's no need. No, I mean, there's no need to apologize. We are used to do that, but if you wish, you can say it. Sorry for the when you answer the questions, no, you don't need to repeat it. But when I speak to you, please speak in English for you. Tu me dis quand on démarre? C'est bon? Ok. Voilà, on a tout le monde a ses écouteurs. Alors, on a aussi le plaisir de t'accueillir pour ce Salon du Livre parce que tu es la deuxième lauréate de la résidence d'écriture attribuée par l'Association des éditeurs de Tahiti et des îles. On a rencontré la première lauréate juste avant toi, Issa Huala. Et toi, tu viens d'arriver ce matin. Tu débutes ta résidence aujourd'hui. Qu'est-ce que tu as ressenti à l'annonce de cette sélection pour la résidence?
Thank you. I was so excited when I learned that I was one of the recipients for the residency. I wasn't sure if I even did the application correctly when I applied, and so I thought, why not try, my luck in trying to apply for it? And when I was notified this summer, I was really, really excited. I think as artists and as writers, time is so essential to our creative process, and to be given the time, the space, the opportunity to just spend on our work and on our projects is truly a privilege and a gift. And so I'm really excited to be here and take on these next 2 months to really dig deeper into my own manuscripts and the books that I'm writing right now.
Et est-ce que tu peux nous parler un petit peu justement de ton projet d'écriture, de ce que tu vas faire pendant ces 2 mois de résidence?
Sure. I think Issa mentioned herself that she was writing a YA novel, a young adult novel, and so that is actually also my project. I have been working on this a novel for young adults for the past 3 or 4 years, and the topic it's exploring is really contending with how climate change impacts not just our people back home in our islands, but also in diaspora and worldwide. The story is told through the eyes of a Samoan American teenage girl from San Francisco, and she's just trying to figure out how climate change affects her life through her school, through her family, through her friends. The unique part of this book is that I'm writing it in poetic form, and so it's written in verse, it's written lyrically, and so every line is a poetic stanza. It's not like traditional prose, the way novels are written. And so it's a challenge, but it's a way to help push myself to get creative with how to talk about a subject as hefty or as big as climate change.
D'accord. Est-ce que le choix de travailler sous la forme d'une résidence dans un pays du Pacifique, est-ce que ce choix a quelque chose à voir justement avec la thématique du livre?
Absolutely. So before arriving here for the residency, I have also been on fellowships in the past to also travel to other islands in Oceania to write this story. Because so much of the center of my story also focuses on the impact of U.S. imperialism, or U.S. militarism in the Pacific, as my own island, American Samoa, is currently a U.S. territory, I have spent also a month back home in American Samoa researching and writing this book and talking to the youth on my islands and going to the different high schools to talk with our kids about the things that matter to them so that it can help inform my writing. I also spent a month in Guam earlier this year, also a U.S. territory, in the Mariana Islands, and learning so much about the U.S. military buildup and impact there as well. And then last but not least, Hawaii. I was part of the American Samoa delegation for FESPAC in June. And so Hawaii also has a deep history of U.S. military buildup on their islands as well. And so I'm thinking through the impact of what our islands were pre-colonial, pre-U.S. militarization, but also what has militarization made of our islands in the wake of the buildup on our water, on our land, on our natural resources, and how that affects people in the U.S. like myself, who lives in California and who comes from a country that has the biggest military in the world, and that dictates a lot of what happens in the Pacific. And so I think it's interesting to be here in Ma'ohinui, as this place also has a rich history of French colonialism, and I'm trying to understand and contend with what that conversation is with my own experiences with American colonialism, because I think the more we uncover the truth of what happened to our people and our islands, the more we can get to the heart of the stories we want to tell to humanize our people's experiences within these different topics.
Ah, c'est très intéressant. Alors il y a un lien, enfin il y a un point commun qu'on retrouve facilement entre juste au-delà de la colonisation, c'est aussi le militarisme qui a été imposé à nos îles, aux tiennes comme celle, comme à Hawaï ou ici en Polynésie française. Et alors est-ce que justement l'impact de cette colonisation militaire en grande partie, de quelle manière est-ce que ça participe à la mise en forme de ton écriture?
Thank you. This topic is very personal to me because my father served in the U.S. Army for 20 years. It was actually the reason he immigrated from American Samoa was because he was encouraged to enlist in the U.S. Army back in 1974. And so he was also, you know, at a time in which the military buildup was very high in American Samoa. My dad was a very young Samoan boy, and he wasn't really understanding what he was doing in terms of joining the military, but before he knew it, he was in it for 20 years and stationed all over the world because of it. And it was how he met my mother in San Francisco and how they had me. But that story has always been such a vital part of my own experience with the military because I don't know any Samoan who doesn't have a close loved one who hasn't been in the military or who hasn't served in the military. And so that storyline is something that I take interest in because as I've been to Samoa many times, I talk to our young kids there, and oftentimes they say that the only opportunities they have to leave the island is through the military and through football, athletics. And so when you think about a child's opportunities to be whatever they want when they grow up, oftentimes you ask kids back home, and they're not telling you, oh, when I grow up, I want to be a writer, I want to be an artist, I want to be a dancer. Like, they're only told very limited options of what they can be. But as someone who is a writer and who wants my kids and my people from back home to have, to be able to dream bigger than what colonization has imposed on them, I want to be able to tell stories of Samoan kids being a cook, being an archaeologist, being whatever they want, right? And so I use poetry to help instruct how people can tap into what their actual dreams are. My father, even though he was in the military, his biggest dream was to be a minister like my grandfather. My grandfather was a minister in the village that my father was from, and my father also wanted to be a minister before the U.S. military enlisted him. And so I'm having this conversation in my writing about what are our actual dreams, or what were our dreams before colonization told us what our dreams should be, right? And so I'm exploring that through my writing and through my novels. Like, what is it that we actually want to do with our lives versus what are the only limited options available to us?
D'accord. Aussi, alors cette rencontre s'intitule à la base Le Pacifique au cœur des mots. Tu nous as parlé un peu plus tôt de ton travail de recherche à Samoa, Guam, Hawaï, et donc maintenant ici à Tahiti pour cette résidence d'écriture. Tu vois donc un peu un panel de plusieurs îles différentes du Pacifique. Quand on parle du Pacifique au cœur des mots, qu'est-ce que ça t'inspire? Est-ce que c'est quelque chose qui est important justement dans ton travail d'écriture ou dans ta réflexion plutôt. Les mots, quelle est la place des mots et de la langue au final dans ce travail?
Absolutely. I think oftentimes when I imagine how our ocean is organized, I think so much about our islands before colonization was that we were actually very connected across our waterways, across language, across our cultures before we were impacted by British, French, American, German, Japanese colonization. And so much of those systems began to tear our connections apart. And so I think writing and Pacific at the Heart of Words has to do with reclamation and reclaiming the stories that we still remember, reclaiming our ability to tell those stories with our voice and through the mediums of storytelling, through music, through dance, through film, through poetry, and reclaiming what we want our stories to be moving forward. As we know, we are also living in the age of climate change, and our cultures are ever evolving because of a lot of us live in diaspora now. A lot of us are also struggling to hold on to our language, our cultural practices, and things like that for all kinds of reasons. And so much of it is also about how do we maintain and hold on to the essential parts of who we are while also evolving as a people, because times are changing, climate is changing, and how do we adapt accordingly to what our current needs are? And I think storytelling and writing really helps get at the heart of how we can maintain these essential parts of who we are, because through our literature, we've been able to pass down our culture. Through our music, through our poetry, we've been able to hold on to things that colonization could never take from us. They couldn't take our ability to speak our language. They couldn't take our ability to sing our songs and write our stories and pass them on to our future generations. And so I think about that and about how we are a oral people. We come from oral tradition, right? And so words have always been innate to who we are as a people, whether or not we wrote it down to begin with. But essentially, I think we are master navigators when it comes to storytelling and holding true to our narrative power.
D'accord. À l'instant, tu nous parlais aussi de différentes formes artistiques, la musique, la danse, les films, la poésie, le roman, de toute évidence. Comment est-ce que toi, pour ta part, dans ton parcours personnel, comment tu es arrivée à être l'autrice que tu es aujourd'hui?
So the first writer I was introduced to was my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. His name was High Chief Leoluso'o Leatutufu. He was an author. He self-published numerous books about the genealogy of Samoa and our Samoan culture. And every day of my life, I grew up watching him type away at his typewriter and then his computer, writing book after book to preserve our Samoan history and our Samoan genealogy. When he died in 2018, I was just in the midst of becoming a full-time poet with my own art and my own artwork. And so I've always had a love for writing because of him. I've always been the girl who was journaling or writing in a diary about my feelings and about the things that were happening to me. But I never had a place to always express it, so I always wrote in notebooks growing up. And so my grandpa was a big influence. And then going to school and reading, being really interested in reading, and eventually, similar to Issa, she talked about how she didn't grow up in Pacific literature until later. Similar, I grew up very influenced by particularly Black American writers, Toni Morrison, June Jordan, Nikki Giovanni, writers of that sort that also helped me understand, well, who are the Pacific writers that I come from? And now I am someone who studies Haunani K. Trask, Terisa and Katerina Tewa, Selena Tusitala Marsh, and so on, Chantel Spitz. And so now I'm in this realm of really wanting to hone in and protect the writers that we belong to as well, right? And so that's a big part of why my journey is where it's at right now as a writer myself.
Okay. En préparant cette rencontre, tu me disais aussi que à la base, ton terrain de jeu, c'est la poésie. Et plus que la poésie, c'est la déclamation en réalité, l'art de performer. Est-ce que tu peux nous en dire un mot, s'il te plaît?
Yeah, so poetry is my main art form, but I came into it through performance poetry, through slam poetry. And so I came into it through the competitive part of poetry, in which I was part of poetry teams, and we would go around and travel and compete as a team against other poetry teams. And we had a specific set of rules that we had to abide by, where our poems had to be no more than 3 minutes, and we had to convey topics that moved the audience so that the audience would give us a high score in order to win the poetry competition, right? And so I spent years competing, and then I also spent years coaching poetry teams, and it really taught me the essence of how to move an audience and how to captivate an audience with limited amount of words and limited amount of time, how to get to the point and the heart of the matter without spending too much time talking about things that maybe they're not as interested in. And so poetry and slam poetry really taught me how the brevity of words, how to minimize your words but still have a maximum profound impact on what you're saying. And so, yeah, I came into poetry through that, and now still writing poetry, using poetry through my writing projects to this day.
En parlant de poésie, il y a un lien évident, enfin on fait le lien évidemment avec les émotions. C'est aussi une part importante de ton écriture, la gestion des émotions.
Yes, poetry is a really important art form when it comes to expressing one's emotions and really getting to the heart of what makes you feel moved, what makes you feel angry, what makes you feel excited, what makes you feel sad. I think poetry, similar to music writing, I feel like oftentimes we listen to songs that evoke sadness, heartbreak, being in love, having pride. Poetry is very similar, just without the musical background, right? But poetry helps us get into the truth of what we're trying to say without having to worry about, does it sound academic enough? Is it sophisticated enough? Poetry allows you to write in your truest voice, in the truest way you want to say what you're trying to say, without any inhibitions or any obstacles in your way, but you just emote and you just reveal and express, and poetry allows you to express in your truest, most rawest form.
Et comment est-ce que tu décrirais justement ton écriture poétique? Est-ce que c'est de la poésie du Pacifique, la poésie océanienne? Qu'est-ce qui définit au mieux pour toi ta poésie?
I think my poetry exists at the intersection of, having pride in being Samoan. I write from a place of pride often, so I get very vivid about what my experience with being a Samoan woman in the world. But I also like to play around with the poem as well, and I like to be submersive and trying new techniques to explore old topics, So for instance, I write a lot about colonization or about the impact of that, but I also write a lot about indigenous joy, like what helps our people to persist despite all of these things that have happened to us. I love exploring the different facets of Pacific womanhood, because I think so much can be said about the stereotypes or the ways we are put into these narrow boxes of what a Pacific woman should be. And I like writing against the grain and exploring, well, what else can a Pacific woman be? And so a lot of my poetry does a lot of like pushing up against the limits of what is expected, and trying on something new to maybe see a topic from a different point of view.
Est-ce que, donc, au-delà de l'écriture poétique, enfin, au-delà de l'écriture tout court, ton parcours de vie t'a aussi fait passer par des pratiques professionnelles très spéciales, puisque tu es à la base thérapeute, psychothérapeute. Est-ce que c'est quelque chose aussi qui a quelque part forgé ou participé à bâtir une vision du Pacifique, une vision de la littérature du Pacifique?
Yes, absolutely. I was a former therapist working within the mental health field with our people, because I started to see the connection between our human emotions and the things that are harder to talk about within our cultures or with our people or within our families, and the connection between that and the power of storytelling and the power of actually using your voice to express yourself. And so a lot of times when I was a therapist and I was dealing with issues of mental health or trauma, anxiety, depression, a lot of times I also coupled that work with writing about those experiences, and I saw the impact it had on my students, in which they were able to explore emotions that they're not always allowed to explore at home or in school or with their closest friends, because they are afraid of being ridiculed or afraid of being isolated or ignored. And so writing helped open up their own healing process. And so I think there's a direct connection between our wellness and our ability to address our mental health with the power of being able to express ourselves and feel safe enough to express ourselves through art, through writing.
Et est-ce que, alors justement, tu as pu expérimenter l'écriture comme outil de guérison avec les gens que tu aidais?
Yeah, and I would say I experience and witness more healing and the power of healing through writing in my poetry workshops more than I ever experienced it when I was a therapist working with clients. I saw the impact of art and storytelling with my students, especially when I would visit Samoa. I would lead them in poetry writing exercises and workshops, and I would see them open up and express themselves and be courageous with their stories in ways that I could absolutely see the healing powers of it in that setting more than I've ever seen when I was working with clients one-on-one. And so it really taught me just the power, the healing power that art has, which is very much part of who we are as Pacific people, that our dances heal us, our music, our stories heal us, right? And so staying in touch with those parts of us are also part of our healing and part of why we're alive today and why we still persist and still thrive as a people and within our cultures.
Et si tu devais faire un peu le compte de toutes ces années de pratique, qu'est-ce qui, en général pour toi, selon ton expérience et ta manière de voir les choses, quel est en fait le premier trauma qui touche les pays ou les peuples du Pacifique, qu'ils soient effectivement dans le Pacifique ou dans des différentes diasporas dans le monde, ou en tout cas dans les communautés avec lesquelles tu as pu travailler?
Yeah, I think the first traumas I witness are very climate related. I think a lot of the experiences I've had with meeting people in different islands, when they would express their experiences with depression or anxiety, oftentimes it was connected to climate change and to the impact that climate change has on our rising sea levels, on the way climate is devastating and changing our land and extracting our natural resources. Oftentimes that anxiety comes home with people, and people are, experience stress with money, with how to feed their family and how to survive. But our survival is directly and intimately connected to the impact that the climate crisis has on our islands, right? That anxiety is not just something that comes up in our body by itself. It's very much directed by the impact that the climate has on us. And so I would say that was my first experience. It's this relationship with climate crisis. The remnants of colonization, a lot of our islands are still surviving the impact of colonization and even present day settler colonialism, right? And so these are all things that add to our stress, our high rates of depression and things like that. And so the more we're able to talk about these things, the easier it gets to address them. And so,
c'est intéressant de voir quand même que finalement ce qui cause le plus de traumatisme, ça reste quand même la menace principale qui pèse sur nos îles, sur les îles du Pacifique. Et on me fait signe qu'on est bientôt arrivé à la fin. On garde en général quelques minutes pour les questions du public. Donc si quelqu'un a des questions à poser à Terisa, elle est là et prête à vous répondre.
Je suis là avec vous.
Hello, Terisa. Have you ever tried to write in Samoan language?
I have, because I'm not proficiently fluent, it's harder, but I do and I try and I will continue to try. But I don't have as much experience with it, but it is a fun and important challenge for me to also, it helps me become more proficient in the writing of it. And so I grew up in a Samoan church in which that's how I learned the language, was through our song and our church programs, but writing in it is a little more difficult, but it is part of my work and it is part of the challenge of my work.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions?
Yaurana, est-ce qu'on pourrait avoir un extrait de ton livre? Merci.
Okay, I can. Is it okay if I read just a little bit of my
Sure.
poem from a book?
Please do.
I'm holding a copy of a poetry anthology that I co-edited. It just came out last month. It's called We the Gathered Heat. And the unique thing about this poetry collection is that it is a collection of Asian American and Pacific Islander poets. And so half of the book is Asian American poetry and then also Pacific Islander poetry. And so one of the poems is also my poem, and I'll just read a little excerpt of it right now. Let me see. So this poem I wrote after one of my many trips back home to American Samoa, and it's just a praise poem or an ode to Samoa and to all that Samoa has given me as someone who, as a child from Samoa, but also as a child in diaspora. So the poem is called Samoan Praise Poem in the Key of Diaspora. Praise the ocean for teaching me that home is not location as much as it is belonging where I am wanted. Praise the ocean for always wanting me, for washing my body in and naming it child. Praise the way the water bites at my ankles but never breaks the skin. Praise the skin on my ankle that had to break for the gun, for the tatau drawn by the gun's mouth in the hands of a tufunga during my first tatau appointment on island when I was 17 years old. Praise his cigarette break so I could complete my sobbing in peace. Praise the umu, the underground oven of hot rocks and fire, cooking the sweet coconut milk in the center of salted leaves for palusami, for the thick galo and soft fattiness of octopus tentacles. Praise the crinkled crack of metal on the edge of every can of tuna, greasy from oiled chunks of fish, peppered over a bowl of hot rice. Praise the ground as dining room table, as only place to eat, at eating at the feet of our elders as the talking chief blessed us in prayer. Praise the mother mosquito and her obsession with the back of my legs. Praise the stench of repellent that stuck to my skin like booby trap, like tourist trick, like second generation, like not quite from here. Praise the heavenly scorch of heat behind my ears. Praise the lowered heads and crossed legs atop each woven fala mat. Praise the village of women who wove them, the mulberry bark that was beaten enough to braid. Praise the broken flip-flops running alongside flattened frogs on the road headed towards the church house. Praise the choir of children who sing with one tongue. Praise the way we lay our dead to rest in front of each house, how there is no need for cemeteries if our kin never really die. Praise the way they return home to us. Praise home. Praise us.
Encore le temps pour une question.
Bonjour. Tu as cité des auteurs, des autrices plutôt comme Toni Morrison, Haunani Kay Trask ou Chantal Spitz, dont les travaux ont beaucoup influencé le monde académique, mais aussi les activistes. Est-ce que leur importance dans les études décoloniales, post-coloniales, avec ou sans tirer, ou des études féministes, représente aussi une inspiration pour toi, et est-ce que le fait qu'elles soient des autrices, des femmes, représente aussi une influence dans tes travaux d'écriture?
Thank you. I love this question. Absolutely. I think I always regard Haunani Kay Trask, the Kanaka Maoli writer, scholar, poet. I always say that no one has radicalized me more around Pacific liberation more than Haunani Kay Trask has, as well as Terisa Siagatonu, who's from Kiribati, Fiji, and her poetry when she was alive also really grounded my understanding of Pacific feminisms, or third world Pacific feminisms. And so, as well as a lot of Pacifica writers within the poetry realm, but also who do a lot of community work, has greatly influenced my own work.
Thank you for being a therapist for mental health issues, because it's a big problem in France now, even here, with all the downtrodden people. I would like you to finish with a slam, please. Standing and give us a slam. Thank you.
Is that okay with everyone? Yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Just wait a second, but just adjust.
Read it here?
Yes.
Okay, I can perform this poem. So I was invited to attend the UN conference on climate change when it was held in Paris in 2015. And I brought this poem with me, and I wrote part of it in America, but then finished it in Paris and have been performing it since 2015. And I wrote it in the spirit of being from the Pacific, but specifically from Samoa. And it's influenced by Terisa Siagatonu's work, in which she used to start her work with the map of the world. And when we think of a map of the world, oftentimes we see the map and we see that it cuts or it splits the Pacific in half, right? And it relegates it to the edges or margins of the world. And so this poem is called Atlas. If you open up any atlas and take a look at a map of the world, almost every single one of them slices the Pacific Ocean in half. To the human eye, most maps center all land masses on Earth, creating the illusion that water can handle the butchering and be pushed to the edges of the world, as if the Pacific Ocean isn't the largest body living today, beating the loudest heart, the reason why land has a pulse in the first place. The audacity one must have to create a visual so violent as to assume that nobody comes from water, so nobody will care what you do with it. And yet, people came from land, are still coming from land, and look what was done to them. When people ask me where I'm from, they don't believe me when I say water. So instead, I tell them that home is a machete, and I belong to places that don't belong to themselves anymore. Broken and butchered places that have made me a hyphen of a woman, a Samoan American that carries the weight of both colonizer and colonized, both blade and blood. California, stolen. Samoa, sliced in half, stolen. California, nestled on the western coast of the most powerful country on the planet, Samoa, an island so microscopic on a map, it's no wonder people doubt its existence. California, a state of emergency, a way of having the drought rid it of all its water. Samoa, a state of emergency, a way of becoming a saltwater cemetery if the sea levels don't stop rising. So when people ask me where I'm from, what they want is to hear me speak of land. What they want is to know where I go once I leave here. The privilege of assuming that home is just a destination and not the panic, not the constant migration that the panic gives birth to. What is it like to know that home is something that is waiting for you to return to it? What does it mean to belong to something that isn't sinking? What does it mean to belong to the very thing that is causing the flood? So many of us come from water, but when you come from water, no one believes you. Colonization keeps laughing. Global warming is grinning all at your grief. How you mourn the loss of a home that isn't even gone yet, that no one believes you're from. How everyone is beginning to hear more about your islands, but only in the context of vacations and honeymoons, football and military life, exotic women, exotic beaches, exotic fruit, but never asks about the rest of its body, the water, the islands in them, the reasons why they're sinking. No one visualizes the Pacific Islands as actually being there. You explain and clarify and fix their incorrect pronunciation and explain till they realize just how vast your ocean is, how microscopic your islands look in them, how easy it is to miss when looking at a map of the world, excuses people make for why they did not see it before.
Merci infiniment. Je te laisse dire un dernier mot pour la fin, Mareva.
Merci. Okay, thank you very much, Terisa. It was a pleasure to have you, and it's a great honor to have you for this residency. We hope that it will be fruitful. And yes, and we're really looking forward to reading your book. Thank you very much for this time. It was lovely, and yes, I can't wait to read more about you.
Fafetai, Maururu, merci, thank you.
Merci beaucoup à Terisa.